Good morning. There's no use trying, Alice said to the Queen. You can't believe in possible things. You just need to practice, answered the Queen. When I was younger, I used to do it at least a half hour a day. In fact, often, I imagined and believed 6 impossible things before breakfast. How many impossible things did you believe this morning before coffee or tea? Lights up, shout them out. Ah, good.
End of poverty.
Great. One or two more. Come on, there must be more impossible things. Remember, the Queen got to 6 often. Oh, good. You know, you've had a lot of practice as this community, and dreaming and believing in impossible things. In fact, all week you've been creating headlines of impossible things that you wanted to do. And so now I get to stand here with the privilege of saying, thank you for that. Thank you for believing in the impossible things, and for taking your visions, your talent, your persistence, your passion, your purpose, and taking it forward to accelerate all of the possibilities, to turn the impossible possible. It's also quite a privilege to stand here at this point and say thank you. Thank you to the leadership team that brings this forum and shares it with all of us year after year. Their vision and thank you to all of the speakers, the entrepreneurs, the guests who have been on this stage before me. This is my 14th forum. Whether it's your first or your 4th or your 14th, I hope that you are already believing deeply in what Bright Simone identified in his acceptance speech when he said, "It is the trust and the solidarity of this community that moves us forward." Feeling that, believing that. This is a community that also understands the power and the importance of change. No matter where we live or what we do in the world, overnight, something has changed. There's been a seismic shift, an algorithmic disruption that can make the impossible seem more impossible. Or, in the hands of entrepreneurs, it can make the possible feel within our reach. And what we have heard together is how you are taking the impossible and every day moving it forward. The shifts, the changes that can be so daunting can lead others to fall into the rabbit holes of despair or to give up or to lose perspective. You have not. You have persevered. And that is why your stories that we share when we come together make us believe that while this isn't a perfect world, we can build a better world and share it together. There are so many sessions and so many narratives that emerge from this convening that it's tempting to want to share them all again to remind us of what we have learned and what we have heard. They're wildly divergent. Yesterday, dropping in on a session called, "What if AI doesn't like me?" Leading another called "Journalist Under Fire" and hearing the serious threats. And then spending time discussing the question, the important question, can art and culture really create change? Well, we know it can, and it must. Out of all the stories, what I take away every year is that journalists bear witness and that entrepreneurs create and sustain the change that does lead to the solutions to the world's most pressing problems. And if that sounds familiar, it should. It is the foundation of everything that Jeff Skoll has created. He believed, when many didn't, that stories well told, narratives compellingly put together, could and would create change. And those are the stories that we hear and share every year. In another great leap of faith, he took it one step further and invited us all to participate in the problem solving. And through participant media, took the stories to other pathways, creating the notion and the belief that narratives well told on screen, no matter the size of the screen, could change our minds, open our hearts, shape our opinions. Last night, we got to see one of participant media's films, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. A tremendously inspiring story, and later today, you'll hear from Chiwetel Ejiofor, the creator, the vision behind that story. But our access to the narratives that inform, inspire, enlighten, ignite our imaginations are threatened. The sources to our trustworthy information, the kind of information we need to be informed parents, grandparents, makers, creators, they're diminishing, as is the consolidation of media ownership, consolidating the opinions and ideologies that continue to divide and diminish. But in that ecosystem, there is one voice that stands strong. One voice that continues to lead us and give us the kind of trustworthy information we need from the front lines of change. And she does it often at great personal risk. Her full bio is in your programs, and I urge you to read it. But let me just share 3 or 4 things that have happened to her in just the last week or so. She was named by Variety as a power woman. No surprise there. UK Vogue named her one of the most amazing and fabulous women over 50. No surprise there. And one definitely worth noting. She was number 12 on a list of the world's 100 most reputable people. Up there with Dalai Lama, Michelle Obama, and Malala. Please welcome CNN's chief international anchor, Christiane Amanpour.
Thank you.
So great to have you here.
It's great to be here. I loved listening to your introductory remarks, and I feel very much the same way as you do about seeking the possible out of the impossible, about not giving up on this world and knowing that we can individually make a change and a difference and accelerate the process of making things better. So it's great to be here.
When we thought about accelerating possibilities, we can think of anyone who helps the rest of us think of ways we can do that by beginning those kinds of journeys with the truth, with knowing what we need to know. And yours has been quite a journey. I was thinking, as I was looking over these honors that just continue to pour in, Christiane, and the many different ways in which your accomplishments are noted. And since we've known each other from the very beginning of our careers, when we will not say how long ago that was, is this the narrative? Is the current Christiane story anything close to what you might have imagined the possibilities to be?
Well, not really, because I've actually been at CNN for 36 years nearly. In September, it'll be 36 years. I mean, I started as a desk assistant, so it was completely and utterly entry level, and worked my way up. But people often ask me, did you want to be a journalist all your life? Or when did you know you wanted to be a journalist? And I didn't, actually. I actually thought I was going to be a doctor, and I was at boarding school here in England, and long story short, I didn't get the right grades to go to medical school. So I was a little bit, wandering around in the wilderness and quite upset about what my life was going to be. And my parents and myself had grown up in Iran, because my father is Iranian, my mum was English, and I thought, oh, crumba, I'm going to have to go back there and, I don't know, an arranged marriage or be a secretary, or I don't know what the hell was going to be my path. And out of the blue came a revolution. Now, I really shouldn't be celebrating that, because it did, in fact, turn the world upside down. It turned families upside down. And the Islamic Revolution of Iran has been the template for the disruptive relations between East and West, and between Islam and Christianity, and, the whole thing for the last 40 years. But I was old enough to recognize it, and to know that this was something massively important, and to be on the streets when suddenly my city was turned into martial law, and everybody who I'd grown up believing was on the heroic side turned out to be the villains, and vice versa, etc. So it was a major turning point, a major learning moment, but it also made me want to be a journalist, because I thought, wow, I want to tell these stories. I want to be able to explain these seismic shifts to people. And I also was very conscious of the photography, the pictures of the instance and the video of what was going on. So that's what made me want to be a journalist.
Well, the video of you on the front lines of war, when you came into our world and into our presence, is this most recognized face of CNN, a burgeoning source of news and information at the time. And sometimes people think, well, you were born in a fatigue jacket. You've been standing on front lines all your life, when in fact, working as a desk assistant was hardly there. So what sparked you to say, oh, that I can do?
Well, here's the thing. I'm not sure whether it's terribly fashionable or part of people's job descriptions or job expectations these days. But 36 years ago, when I first joined CNN, it was sort of absolutely taken for granted that you would start at the bottom, and if you were very lucky, you'd work your way up to somewhere. It wasn't just the expectation that you would arrive somewhere and all doors would be open to you and you would have this phenomenal, fantastic, great job and you'd be so fantastic. It didn't work like that. And actually, I'm kind of glad that it didn't work like that. No, I'm very glad, because I really believe that to be competent, to be authentic, to be able to have the authority, and especially for women, the word authority is very important, to be able to have the confidence to do this kind of work, or whatever kind of work, you need to learn it from the nuts and bolts upwards, and then create this thing that becomes your career, your mission, your purpose, or whatever it is. But it can't be created out of clouds. It has to be created out of scaffolding. And that scaffolding of working very hard and coming in on my own time and offering to do whatever it took, writing, producing, cleaning my boss's desk, doing the Twinkie run, all of that kind of stuff. I did, and I was also always said yes, and I actually asked for opportunities in which to say yes, and I would, be very dramatic and say, I have to quit now because I really need to do this, and if you're not going to let me do it, I'm going to have to go somewhere else or do it on my own or whatever. So a couple of times I did that, and
I can testify to that, actually.
But I also walked, filled dead man's shoes quite a few times, and they were men's shoes, and that's what happened. And then when CNN exploded onto the world's consciousness was during the first Gulf War. And it just happened to be my first story.
Let's see, it just happened. Let's take a look at that early video. There's certainly no one here who doesn't have this in their memory embedded, but to remind us of what launched this narrative.
People were still marching.
This is the entrance to the city of Basra. Here we are in Habila, a village that has not had any food distribution since June. When the families have finished looking at the names that are posted on those boards, they come here This is now a memorial to the victims of the Srebrenica massacre. Where in the Quran does it justify the killing of innocents? Christiana Manpour, CNN, with elements of the Galilee division in Israel. I'm Christiana Manpour in Iran, in Amsterdam, in Jerusalem, Washington, D.C. So come with me around the world. We're very interested to see what's going on here.
What do you think when you look at those images?
You know, I think, wow. I mean, I'm really...
That's sort of what we all think, too.
But the wow is more because I just can't believe I've had this unbelievable opportunity. I mean, it's just so phenomenal for me. And it's crazy. It's just crazy. I'm just an ordinary girl who grew up in a middle-class family in Iran, and this is what happened. And I grew up with CNN, and I feel CNN is in my DNA, and most particularly because, as you know very well, the founder of CNN was somebody who would lead an organization like this one, right? The Skull, because everything that he believes, you all believe. He was the world's first, I'd say, entrepreneur with a conscience.
Yeah.
He created the media revolution with 24/7 CNN. He then went on to do, bringing people together during the Cold War with the Goodwill Games. He was the first mega public capitalist person to lobby for the environment and for climate, corralling loose nukes after the fall of the Soviet Union. In other words, and most particularly, and this is really important in today's world, again, in our DNA at CNN, there is no other. We believe, and we have been taught to believe, that everybody counts. Ted Turner would not let us use the word foreign. It was international. And I was pissed because I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, Instead I had to be an international correspondent.
Right.
But the point was that each and every nationality, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic group, whatever it is, had its own place in the world and its own dignity, and we had to respect that, and we couldn't take these kinds of sides.
So true. And I respect so deeply that you bring this forward, because it is leadership. And it was Ted Turner and it is Jeff Skoll who have the leadership visions, which are shared in this case, which is news is too important not to make it, not to tell the stories that matter, know how hard it is to tell those stories. And you yourself went to the hardest places, and it's easy to admire that, as we do, as courage, as bravery. It took that because you were at great personal risk. In what ways were you thinking about the work then as a new way of storytelling, recognizing that you had an opportunity to create a new kind of narrative?
I think Bosnia was the turning point, and one of the first images there where I'm running across is under sniper fire and this and that. And Bosnia, which I covered along with many of my colleagues for the entire war, which was practically the whole of the 90s, Bosnia and then Kosovo, taught me everything about this job and about truth and neutrality and objectivity and about myself as a person and about our profession as a power for good. So just to quickly run down, Bosnia was the first place where journalists became deliberately targeted. Up until then, in Vietnam, in Central America, in the Middle East, etc., journalists generally were considered, friends of all sides. They could tell everybody's story, they were welcomed, and if they were injured or killed, it was usually, sadly, in the crossfire. In Bosnia, it changed completely, and therefore we lost a lot of people, wounded, killed. I always touch wood that luckily I survived unscathed in that physical way. Courage didn't occur to me at the time, because what you're trying to do is survive, and you have to have, your wits about you in order to do that. I learned afterwards, though, that moral courage was even more important than physical courage, and I always used to quote, and I still do, Robert Kennedy's famous speech in South Africa about moral courage and how that's even more difficult often than physical courage. And I learned that in a very clear way, in that I was profiled for my work in in Bosnia. And somebody said, oh, but Christiane, she's taking sides, she's not objective. And I was very upset. And because objectivity is our golden rule. So I had to think about what that meant. And I said, well, what do they mean? I'm telling the truth. And the truth was that there was one side which were the victims and another side which were the aggressors. That's the truth. And international criminal law has enshrined that in the verdicts that the Criminal Tribunal in The Hague actually came out with after the war. One side were the aggressors, the other side were the victims. And I couldn't muddle the two. I knew it instinctively, and as a journalist, I had to tell the truth, and the truth meant that sometimes we were unpopular with the do-nothing brigade. Oh, all sides are equally guilty. Oh, it's centuries of ethnic hatred. And a lot of people believed that, therefore they did nothing, and therefore there were massacres every day of the week until we had Srebrenica, in which case our democratic world that's built on values like human rights and justice could no longer look away, and they had to intervene. So I basically said, objectivity does not mean neutrality. Truth does not mean neutrality. You cannot create false moral or factual equivalences. And if in cases of genocide and the wholesale violation of international humanitarian law, if you do that, A, you're lying, and B, you're an accessory. And I refuse to be an accessory to genocide in Bosnia.
This is the struggle to find the truth, to know the truth, becomes more and more daunting every day. We've had a lot of conversations about it at this year's forum. And in your struggle to get the truth of a story, the truth of a leader, and to bring it to us, you moved from those front lines to another kind of front line, which is a face-to-face confrontation with leaders. Let's take a quick look at just a bit of Amanpour, the show that you host for CNN.
Mr. Welcome to the program. President Barzani, Aung San Suu Kyi. Today we live in an unpredictable environment, and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
As long as he's here, I'm here.
I'm talking about President Trump.
Yes.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. What would you like the American people to know? And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives. I mean, you can't argue with that, right?
I can.
Your administration didn't do it. Big mistake, right?
I think it was a big mistake.
You were right in the middle of the Me Too moment. Do you think things are getting better? Do you fancy singing a few bars now? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening.
Is Russia making us racist? Is that who's doing it?
You say we shouldn't sugarcoat the consequences. This is surveillance. That's pretty controversial.
Well, it's the truth.
And fully understand what's at stake.
So among that group, which has included every single leader in the world, I think, maybe not, who have you not gotten to that you want to?
Kim Jong-un I'd like to talk to. Donald Trump.
That's right, you haven't. Well, I was just going to ask you who's been the hardest to get the truth from, but...
A lot of people.
May have just answered that question.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I mean, my new mantra, for want of shorthand, is truthful, not neutral. I mean, that's a promo, so it's not it's not some of the more in-your-face opportunities that I've had with some of these people, but you just got to hold them accountable, and you've just got to. I thought maybe if I could bring my experience in the field into the studio and just talk to people, and they know that I've been there. I mean, every single one of these interviews, I've been in the field. I've done the work before I sit down with them over a period of nearly 30 years. So I feel confident. I feel that I can sit mano a mano with people, but it takes a huge amount of studying, a huge amount of research. I say sometimes it's almost like doing a PhD every single day. And of course, it's not because I can't, but you have to be seriously prepared. And it's not easy, and you have to be prepared not to be popular, and you have to be prepared not to be liked, and sometimes you have to sit there, with undemocratically elected leaders who are chest bristling with all sorts of medals which they either earned or didn't earn, and they've got, squads of heavily armed people around them, and you think if you're going to ask them the wrong question, you might get pounced on. So, you know.
I wondered about that in watching Amanpour, as I do. Sometimes that feels like a more fearful or even dangerous environment.
Well, sometimes it is. I mean, when I went to
frontline.
ABC, I call it on assignment for a brief period of time when I left CNN. I said it was a whole different kind of war zone. And particularly at that time, I went to do a Washington Sunday morning talk show, which is a colossal failure, but I own my failures. And it was a colossal failure because they simply didn't want to be asked, you know, the real questions. It was all process and politics, and we've seen where that's got us. So I believe in policy and trying to get real answers, and I also believe in solutions, and I know that there are solutions under all this mess, and I like to see if we can get it out. And, you know, the huge issues that we're faced with now, which are climate is my biggest issue. It should be everybody's biggest issue, you know, and I think that here's another instance of how not being truthful and trying to be neutral has brought us to the brink of this cataclysmic moment where the press has also played a very negative role in trying to seek equal time and equal, you know, fact, which is just not true. A handful of deniers and the overwhelming number of science cannot be treated equally. And it's the young people who are hopefully going to get us out of this, people like Greta Thunberg and the others who hopefully will shame the generation that has not done nearly enough.
Let's stay with this wide agreement from this audience, and we've been struggling with this in session after session. There isn't any subject that we don't tackle here at the forum in which the media and the role of the media, increasingly distressing, increasingly distrusted, plays a part. How do you feel about that, and what can we, as active, engaged citizens anywhere in the world, do about that?
Well, look, it's obviously very bothersome. I mean, to be in a profession which is suddenly, you know, seriously distrusted is not a comfortable place to be. And it's actually quite sad because I strongly believe that this profession, you know, especially in the democratic world, which has either constitutional or non-constitutional respect for freedom of expression and a free press, you know, to be told, well, I don't know where to seek the truth is a little bit of a gut punch. And I think that there are places where you can find the truth. And I do believe that it is up to individuals now to search for that. We're doing our best. There are brands in this environment which have been proved to be truthful, trustworthy, credible, authentic, by dint of experience, longevity, and you know, being at the pyramid, the top of the pyramid. So there's the CNNs, there's the New York Times, there's the Wall Street Journal, there's the BBC, there's everywhere in the world there is. You can find the truth, but you have to be willing to do that and not be lazy and be overwhelmed and overcome by this ridiculous habit of just like social mediaing and scrolling and believing every stupid conspiracy theory that's out there. I think people have to take responsibility if they want to get the truth. Yeah, it's not just on us, it's on everybody.
It's such an important point, and let's talk about it just a bit more, because it is easy to kind of throw up your hands as a media consumer and say, well, it's just a landscape of babble, which it certainly feels like our set opinions and these, as we know, silos in which we are hearing the same echo over and over. But you as a journalist, you and someone working for a news organization, you are inside the beast, as it were. What can you do and what can we do?
Well, I think we can continue to do what we have to do, and that is the reporting, the seeking the facts, the seeking the truth, and bringing the stories. Look, I think I agree that if there are complaints that some of today's news, events, situations are covered too much in like panels and talking heads. And I'm a reporter. I actually came into the studio for personal reasons, for my son, and because, you know, he needed me at that particular time. I left Europe, I went to the United States. It was less obvious there that I could be this fireman traveling around the world. So for a period of time, I thought I would try to do it in the studio. But I think in this profession, we must all be reporters. We must all be willing to go out there and seek the facts and the evidence. I mean, who was I talking to? The Robert Caro, the famous Lyndon Johnson biographer, who has not yet written his fifth and final episode, but he has written his own memoir about working. And he said a couple of things which I think were really good. you know, maybe you can't actually define the truth. I mean, I think you can, but he said, maybe you can't. But what you can do is go out and find the facts and the empirical evidence, and fact by fact, piece of evidence by piece of evidence, you build the picture that is the accurate picture of what's going on. So that's our basic responsibility. Then the other responsibility, he said, a copy editor of his, when he was a young cub reporter, had told him, you know, what you should do in your notebook when you're doing interviews is write the word shut up. And he didn't mean for the other person to shut up, he meant for us to shut up. You know, give the space for them to talk, and then you find all the information in those spaces. Don't always believe that what you're saying is the most important. And, you know, it's an occupational hazard, and sometimes I'm guilty of that. So I've started to write SU. I'm trying to make my questions shorter and listen, more.
I'll try and do the same.
You're doing just fine, Pat. She was my boss once. Had to be good.
A good one, though, yeah.
Very good one.
You chose at another point in your personal narrative that you needed still a bigger way, a longer way, a more deeper way to tell stories, and you chose to make documentaries. Well,
Oh, that, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Yes, it was fun.
yes.
Yeah.
But why?
Well, I did my first documentary with you,
True.
and again, it was a bit of a sort of a stereotype buster. I went back to Iran. I did sort of the story of reform in Iran at that time. Boy, it seems so long ago, 1999. Through sort of my own personal story. So that
got in a lot of
really
trouble
good.
and
I
got
a
banned
lot
from
of
going
trouble,
home again.
Got a lot of
Yeah.
trouble. Yeah, I was banned for 5 years. And then I've done a few in the post 9/11 world. I've done, you know, Osama bin Laden documentaries and God's Warriors about the major sort of epochal divides, religion and politics, whether it's the Christian right in the United States, the orthodoxy in Israel, and the fundamentalism in the Islamic world, all had a major role to play in politics as well. And then I did something different. This past year, I did Sex and Love Around the World. I thought it's time. It's time.
It is, believe me, different. And we can't show you the whole thing, but we'll just show you just maybe, well, we have time for just a bit of it, just to give you an idea of another Christian.
I've learned from war survivors how to rebuild. I've asked world leaders about the moments that really matter. I've discovered the passion created by faith. And now I'm on a new, unexpected journey to understand the rules of engagement in our most intimate relationships. Tokyo, in a city of contradictions, I want to know more about how the women here live and love.
Do you think Japanese society is changing for women? Ladies, let's talk about sex.
We're on our way to see new refugees from Afghanistan, and I've always wanted to ask about how they managed to maintain intimacy.
Were you ever told that you also have a right to be happy, to be loved?
We have to be careful with this question. That is a dangerous question.
Well, we had to be very judicious in editing what we could share out of that documentary. But
it was PG. It had to be PG.
It was, but
Yeah.
it was a different look at Christiane Amanpour.
It was. Because I got this idea brushing my teeth before going to work during the height of the
Believing
Syria
in
war.
possible things before breakfast.
Correct.
Yeah.
During the height of the Syria war, and watching all these people come out, as I've seen so many, you know, refugees fleeing throughout my career. And I suddenly thought to myself, but how does it work? I mean, it's one thing to survive, but how do you then continue as a family? How do women, I wanted to see it through women's eyes, to be honest, this series. How do you have sex in a tent with your 10 children lying next door to you and 200,000 other people as neighbors with just a thin piece of, what do you tell your daughter about growing up? And then that just spread to more questions about intimacy. It's really more intimacy than sex. We didn't do anything about, the seedy underbelly. This wasn't about, sex trafficking or pornography or prostitution. This was about ordinary people in ordinary lives, sometimes extraordinary situations, and how how intimacy played a role, and particularly in empowering women and how they felt they could claim, in the term of the day, agency in their own intimacy and fulfillment.
It's a very serious documentary.
It is, actually.
All
Fun.
kidding aside, because it does bring up issues that are very hard to discuss in any other arena. And you ask some very dangerous questions.
Oh, you heard.
You
heard that Afghan woman
Yeah.
told me it was dangerous to ask an Afghan woman about whether she was happy or not.
Yeah.
A dangerous question.
Right.
That really struck me.
So we're at the end of our time together, and there's so many more questions I want to ask. But I'll just ask a dangerous one. What's next?
I'm not telling you.
That's fair.
Mostly because I don't know. More of the same.
Thank you very much,
Sex and love
Christian.
through men's perspectives.
Oh, well, there you go. And one thing we know for sure, that whatever you do, Christian, we can look to you to know that we are hearing the truth.
Thank you.
And we are grateful for all that you do to make that come to us.
Thank you, Pat.
And please continue.
Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. It was really fun. Thank you very much.
Christian, tell her to come back. What a privilege it is to share the stage with that woman I so admire. And now I get to introduce you to another woman that I really admire. To say that Jess Search is awesome and unique is an understatement, isn't it? She's awesomely impressive, whether you're having tea or coffee or a drink with her, or whether you're watching her on this stage and in so many others. But what you might not know about Jess Search is that she is an awesomely talented documentary producer. And through the Doc Society, she is enabling and bringing forth the kinds of stories that really do accelerate possibilities. And every time she's on this stage, she does that for us. Please welcome Jess Search.
Good morning. I love that woman. In fact, I'm going to let you in on a little secret, which is that earlier, Pat and I engaged in an epic arm wrestling competition. She's a tough competitor, and we went best out of 3, but I won this year, and that means that I have the enormous pleasure now of introducing our next guest at the forum, the writer, director, and actor Chiwetel Ejiofor. You get to clap again when he comes out, and you'll want to. So Chiwetel already has a global reputation as an extraordinary actor, a BAFTA award, and an Academy nomination for his extraordinary performance in 12 Years a Slave. He is often seen in complex works which explore the legacy of colonization, like the film Half a Yellow Sun, about the Biafran War, or the play A Season in the Congo. Many of you have already seen his new film, his latest film, and his directorial debut. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It's already out on Netflix. And there were a lot of you here last night when Participant put on a screening for the film in this room. Who came last night to see the film? Yeah, fantastic. Well, for those who haven't yet had the pleasure, it's based on the true story of William Kamkwamba, a 13-year-old boy from Malawi, a farmer's son, who literally taught himself how to make power-generating windmills from scrap materials. It's a portrait of village life that is so full of love and intimacy. But before he comes out, I want us to have a clip for those that haven't yet seen the film, particularly to get a taste of the father-son relationship at the heart of the movie. This is from quite near the beginning. Let's have the clip.
Pamene ndenali nyamata wa mnyono panali bemba rekodi. Akulu sankata kudzi wazaka zako kama panali teste yake. Pamene yankata kayikachala chenya chotse chatsanja lako la komanja pa mutu wako kukuto lako la komanzera yamata kupita ku skulo. Oyamba pomwe ndenayesera ndenali wochepa kwambiri. Sindenati. Yes, sir.
Izo zinali zanu baba kuti mupite ku primary school. Nendija kupanga choncho.
Nde. Pita ku school.
Please welcome Chiwetel.
Thank you.
It's funny, in the rehearsal yesterday, I was wearing a smart suit and you wearing denims. Yeah. We turned up today and we swapped the other way out. Welcome to the Skoll World Forum. Thank you for coming. It's your first time here.
Thank you. What a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Amazing to hear Christiane. I don't quite know how to follow that, actually. But amazing. What an amazing event.
What an amazing woman, yeah. So the film, there is so much to love about the film. Thank you for the film. It's a beautiful, loving piece of work.
Thank you. Thank you.
And people will have 100 reasons to love the film, but maybe you're already getting the idea that for this audience, it's absolute catnip, because William is the archetypal social entrepreneur. What an extraordinary story of someone who has both the vision and the practical skills to imagine something that has not been seen in his village and to kind of manifest it. Completely extraordinary. I first discovered his story through TED, and then there was a book that he co-wrote. And I think that's how you discovered his story, right? Through the book. Can you tell us what your feelings were when you first read the book? And also, I'd love to know when you first actually met William.
Yeah, so I read the book in 2009, just after it came out. A friend of mine was working at ICM, and ICM repped the book, and so she was actually at the book launch party and told me about this book. And so I read it, and I was totally stunned by it. Just stunned by William Kamkwamba, stunned by his journey, what he went through, the authenticity of the book, the absolute depth and detail and humility that he went through the process in relaying his story as much as the story itself. And that sort of tenacity of this young man living in the solution to the problems that he was facing in this way was something that I hadn't had any real exposure to, in a way, in this style, in this way of telling a story, and really being in the center of his own destiny, and his point of view, and his family's point of view, and the village's point of view, and the realism of those things. So it was something that I was just immediately deeply inspired by, really.
And when did you get to meet him? Because presumably that would have been part of your process as you were looking into, should this be the film that I want to develop, and how do I take the next step from here? You optioned the book, and then...
I optioned the book, and I started the process of writing the story immediately. And it was only after the first draft of that I then went out to Malawi for the first time. And he met me there and took me around the village, took me around Wimbe, took me around Kasungu. He was incredibly generous with me, and we just spent a lot of time together. I got to meet his family on that occasion for the first time, and was able to sit with them, interview them. It was just a very kind of open experience in terms of meeting the whole community and of spending time in Wimbe, and starting to get the idea really at that point that I wanted to really bring the film there, to really try and shoot it all in the real places that the events happened, as much as I could. I wanted to shoot in his school. Every time he took me to a different place, I thought, well, this is perfect. This would be perfect for the movie.
Well, I work in documentary, so I totally feel that, yeah.
Exactly. So that was the experience. He's such a generous, open guy, and and he's still so connected to that community, obviously. And, I wanted to shoot the film right in his house, right in, but he's done so much sort of innovation around his house and around the whole homestead that it didn't look anything like it did back then, so I couldn't do that. But he was just so embracing that I just wanted to try and capture some of that for the audience, really, to try and really take the audience into the private space of the Kamkwamba family and community.
And I think that deep authenticity in the film really resonates. You know, there's something different in the film, and it's clearly that, you know, that you didn't set the film in an easier country to film in, that you were like, no, this needs to kind of be truly kind of place. And I wanted to explore that a bit more, because proximity and the importance of proximity is a big theme for us here at the Skull World Forum, about making sure that we are either bringing solutions that we're close to, or we're listening to those that are very close to solution. I feel there's a love of village life in this film, which is not an outsider's gaze. And I wondered if you could speak to your own personal experience, because not in Malawi, but in Nigeria, you spend a lot of time in those kinds of environments. And for me, I can really feel the soul of that in the film. People are nodding, the soul of that in the film. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that I guess that all started, you know, I spent time when I was growing up in going back and forth to Nigeria. And although in Enugu, which is the town that a lot of my family still live and where my grandparents had their house and everything, so we would spend sort of time in town, but we had family and relatives in the villages. And so we would, when I'd be in Nigeria and we'd be in Enugu for a few days, and then we'd go out to the village to see extended family and so on. And I did that when I was growing up quite a lot. And I had experiences in the village, in that community, that sense of community, that were very different to the perceptions of sort of African rural village life that I then saw reflected back at me when I was back in the UK or back in the Western world. You know, there was just some massive disconnect to those two things. I didn't, you know, it took me a long time as I was growing up to understand what that distinction was, what that difference was, and why it was there. And then there was a certain point when I thought, well, maybe it's actually kind of, is it cynical? Is it a cynical depiction of African village life? You know, because it feels very disconnected and untrue to me. And then at a certain point I felt like maybe it's not, it's just a lack of understanding of these spaces. You know, it's a lack of understanding, it's a lack of point of view, it's a lack of being inside the experience or feeling invited really into the private spaces of these communities. So I felt like there was a responsibility, and when I was reading William's book for the first time, that was one of the things that struck me. I thought, well, this is an authentic representation of village life, of sort of a rural experience, and because it doesn't depict sort of what people are, the poor on the African continent in a rural community, but it really depicts who they are. And it goes that step further into the experience, and it invites an audience into that point of view. And I think that was the crucial turning point for me in wanting to tell William's story in the way that I did, that I felt that there was a connection. There are huge, vast differences between Malawi and Nigeria in the rural community, and in every other community, but there are also some connections, you know, and there are cultural connections, the depth of the complexity of rural life, of village life, the layering, the different ways that the family operates and organizes itself, an extended family through those very complex communities and what they mean to outside the village life, you know, into the town communities, the urban centers, who is connected to that, who's not, who's leaving, who's staying. All of these kind of dynamics, as well as the kind of very patriarchal dynamics in the system, and how that works in the wider aspects of that community. And I felt like it was really worth exploring that with some depth, with some honesty, and allowing an audience potentially to go behind that curtain to see and to invite an audience into that private space.
And I really liked one of the things that you said at Sundance when you said, you know, poverty is of the pocket. It's not poverty of spirit or mind. And it shouldn't be that that's still something, do you know what I mean, that we need to be reminded of. But the film does that so beautifully. And I feel like, you know, there's so much in the film. There's so many themes. There's so many things to take away from it. It so beautifully speaks to, you know, to climate, to education, to patriarchy, to all these things, but we know kind of very effortlessly. But perhaps one of the overarching messages is, you know, just give these people the agency to solve their own problems. rather than, do you know what I mean, like have problems sort of solved for them. That was clearly, you know, the sort of deep driving intention.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I thought was incredible about William's story and his journey is that, you know, that there's a lot of different layers to it, and there were a lot of different layers to it for me. One of the things, of course, was that he sort of forced his way into this space where he had this tiny bit of opportunity, you know, in the library, and was able to really, really run with that. And that sense that, yes, these young people or people in certain situations, you know, if we listen to how they identify the problems that they face, and then and the solutions that they seek to find to those things, it's very important, and it's not, in my view, done enough to really listen to the people in terms of how they identify and how they see their issues and what they see as the solutions to their issues. And I think we can do. Thank you.
Let's we've got a second clip, and this feels like a great moment, because here in this clip we see William prototyping what will later become the kind of beautiful giant windmill that he makes. This is him kind of in his early experimentations. Let's see that now.
This is an experiment. In America, electricity made from wind. We're going to build a windmill. We need to build a small one first to see if it works. Ilindi motor, it turns the cassette. Zilibwanji za mikono yokumeneko. Kimaliza bompano. Segura chiseko.
And of course he goes on to build this giant wooden windmill that brings the water up out of the ground. And one of my favourite things that I read in the production notes was that when the team had to recreate William's windmill, that it like took a whole team of people to sort of recreate what this lad had.
Yeah, it was really complex, actually. Yeah. It was really difficult. You got the whole design team out, and there's people flown in from the UK and Brazil, and you know, we're all there. We're trying to build this windmill, and I'm saying, "Come on, guys! He was 13," and you know. But it humbled us all, actually, and it really brought home, you know, the achievement, you know, William's achievement. And actually, in that sequence there as well, you know, it was part of that whole idea of what individuality means and how special it is, you know, to have this concept of individuality and how important that is. But it has to be in the context of community, you know, and that is, and those two sides are what does really, and I think in that sequence it really does do that in the film. That's what really lifts the spirit, that you feel that individuality supported. So we're not obsessed with individualism, you know, that we understand that it is a community, and that can be local or global, or it is all of us, you know, coming together. That's
you're hitting every single big theme of this community one by one.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you why you think we have had so few narratives like this. Because another thing we've been talking about this week is the need to change narratives, because the narratives that people see really matter. They actually really determine perception in a way that's very powerful and really plays into real life outcomes and politics and such. So whilst obviously wonderful, your film's a game changer, I think, in many ways, because it is a portrait of village life in Africa, and it's a wonderful mainstream story. But it must be bittersweet that it is a game changer. Why do we see so few of these stories, and how do you feel about how that impacts Africa?
Well, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think there's a lot of different reasons why it's taken a bit of time, to get to a point whereby we can really start to engage with stories and storytelling like this. But I feel like we're right on the cusp of being able to do that in a more sort of more aggressive and, if you like, and a more open way. I feel like, there's a lot of elements. When you're starting the conversation, for example, there's a lot of the preconceived ideas about even shooting in an African country, even making a film in an African country, which are all of the same ideas that people talk about in terms of investing in an African country or moving to an African country, all of the same kind of conditioning, essentially. Western conditioning that we have about the continent comes to play when you're looking at making a film. So you then need partners to come on board who are willing to go there, to really engage with that. We were very fortunate, first of all, with the BBC and BFI and then Participant Media to come on board and really engage with telling the story in Malawi and not really pushing for South Africa or anywhere else, to tell the story, but to really go there, even though there hadn't been a film of this size, in anywhere near this size, made in Malawi. So there was a lot of the logistical difficulties, but with the engagement of the people, and it was a very kind of rich and rewarding experience, and a pretty smooth experience, really, in the end, of shooting there. So there's a sense of just encouraging that kind of dynamic and that kind of optimism, basically, that can happen across the board, really. It's not just in the film industry. There is also something about, for myself and my sort of generation, which is like the children of a lot of African migrants from the 60s and 70s, is that my parents, coming over to the West, had all of the immediate struggles and issues that they were dealing with, and then, trying to educate the children and trying to sort of have the children have sort of a little bit more than they had type thing, the sort of the very classic immigrant struggle. And so then it is sort of down to my generation to be able to try and bridge that gap, to say, well, I understand about this place a bit more maybe than people who haven't had that experience and that cross-cultural experience, but I also understand about certain things from a Western perspective and Western life, and so being able to make films in a very Western tradition, but about things that are specifically African, I think, and to relate that experience in a fuller way is the charge and the challenge of diversity, and that's part of my responsibility, and that's what I want to engage with, and I think that there is, and I feel that there is, the response to this film has been overwhelming, and that engagement across the world, sort of, globally, and this sort of sense of millions and millions of people engaging with this film and wanting to hear those stories, and that increase in companies being willing to invest in that sort of arena at a time when people can actually start to cross those borders in a way and tell authentic stories about who people are, not just what they are, I think is going to enrich the cultural space, in a very radical way.
And one of the other, one of the other pieces of conditioning, I feel, was always this sort of assumption that mainstream audiences, whatever they were, weren't going to watch black leads, or they weren't going to watch stories set in Africa. Obviously applied to female leads too, and other kinds of stories. It does feel like a huge shift in kind of mainstream, not just Hollywood, but also mainstream in other places, thinking on those issues. Is that what you're feeling? Because actually, I gather that the numbers on Netflix, I know Netflix numbers are never published, but I gather that the numbers absolutely reject the idea that there is not an absolutely mainstream, broad, wide audience for stories about Africa.
Yeah, that's true. There clearly is. There's clearly a great appetite for stories and for storytelling, and I think we always sort of knew that. And I think that there was, there is a sense of kind of breaking down essentially these inherited traditions, about these all of these distinctions and differences, and what is traditionally what has worked, and why people have existed in a state of isolation or in fear of the other, and maybe in the past century, that was important for certain reasons, and maybe we're still in a bit of the kind of post-Cold War paranoia about everywhere else, but I feel like we've got to move through that, and I think we'll move through it as a kind of global community. It's one of the reasons why I'm always disturbed by the talk of developed and developing, just as an expression. It just suggests such difference, like even a kind of temporal difference, yes, it's better than the sort of existential crisis of not even being in the first world or second world or third world, but this idea of that distancing, with the real truth being that, of course, we're all developing, and we're all developing together, and we have to continue to develop together. That's the, in a sense, that's the essential truth of the moment that we're going through. It's a recognition that there are things to change and to develop in this cultural context, and in the cultural context that you see in the film, and it's incredibly enriching and rewarding to try and experience that as a global community, especially as certain interests essentially try to drive those wedges, or continue to drive those wedges, or to try and deepen those wedges that divide us. I think the fight is really a sense of how we can all progress together. I think it's obviously the richer way forward.
They're going to applaud everything you say, because everything you say makes so much sense to them. This role that the film can play in shifting narratives and perceptions is obviously absolutely critical, but I also wanted to zero in on the messages in the film around education, because, clearly at the heart of the film is a story about, a young boy who wants to go to school and a father who wants to send him there, but then actually the kind of impacts that they've got coming in over climate and the struggle to put food on the table and to just kind of subsistence living, and he can't pay the school fees, and then actually has to do this extraordinary innovation kind of on his own terms and out of school. So there's such a strong message in the film about the need for education. And I know that participants have made a fantastic partnership with Fred Swanecker, who actually spoke at the closing plenary last year at the African Leadership Institute, and the extraordinary work that he's doing there to think about new models of education in Africa. That must be very gratifying to see the film being put to use in this way, and being put to use to kind of raise conversations and resources for education.
Yeah, obviously in the film, that's the kind of crucial element of the story is William and his education and his fight to be educated, and what that really means, and the impact of that. And that's, in a sense, I was sitting, when I first read the book, I was in Los Angeles, and in 2009, and I'm reading a book about a boy sneaking into school, and I'm thinking for myself and my own experience when I was 13, about how inconceivable it would have been for me to be sneaking into school. I would have done anything else, essentially. And reflecting on that sense of privilege, but then also thinking, and his capacity to sneak into this school means that I am now reading a book about him, which I want to then, make into a film, which will hopefully reach a lot of people who will, maybe young people who might be inspired in different places in the world to pursue aggressively their education, and for people in leadership to prioritize a bit more of the education of younger people, all of this essentially is from William Kamkwamba, one person trying to sneak into his school, trying to get an education for himself. And so on another level, what it means to me as well is that this idea of investing in education, of this idea of even if it seems like a drop in the ocean, it isn't really. Anybody, this is what I love about Fred Swaniker and the work he does at the African Leadership Academy, is that essentially, it's a group of people every year who go in and, Maxwell Simba, who plays William Kamkwamba in the film, is then joining the African Leadership Academy at the end of this year, which is fantastic, and an amazing continuation of those things. He's a wonderful student and a terrific actor. I mean, I was sure, as those of you who saw the film know. And this idea that you can have these incredible impacts from young people that don't have to be, great in number, essentially. Hopefully we can get there. But it is every person going into that process has the capacity and has the potential to do to make changes that can in themselves be exponential and increase opportunity in an exponential way. That's the power of education, is that it has that extraordinary ripple effect that can move out and at such an extraordinary and accelerated pace. That's why I was excited about William Kamkwamba. That's why I'm excited about Maxwell. That's why I'm excited about the African Leadership Academy. That's why I continue to do work in Nigeria with education. My mother has a school in Nigeria. So, I think for me, that's the crucial energy. It's engaging the young people, engaging the youth, getting people excited about education, and people who really want to get into that space, really showing them, having the opportunity to show them really what that can mean. And for everybody here, everybody in the West and everybody who's watching the film on Netflix, I think it's incredible, but it's almost just to imagine what this film might mean in a community like William Kamkwamba's community, in a rural community on the continent, what it might mean for a young person there to see a film like this, is really quite powerful.
And everything that you said today is why we're so excited about you and your film. We are out of time. Please give it up for Chiwetel. Chiwetel! Before we move on, I wanted to give a shout out to Femi Nylander, one of the student organisers of the Roads Must Fall campaign here in Oxford in 2015 when he was at the university. The students were demanding that the statue of Cecil Rhodes, white supremacist and imperialist, come down from his perch above Oriel College, his alma mater. The college and the Rhodes Scholarships, which bear his name, received very generous funding from Rhodes, who made his fortune in the African diamond trade. Well, Oriel refused, and Rhodes still stands. But Femi, I want you to know that no good campaign ever goes to waste. Just 3 weeks ago, St John's College, Oxford, broke ranks and announced a 2-year fellowship to investigate the college's role in both perpetuating and benefiting from colonialization. And that is progress. And now it gives me just extraordinary pleasure to introduce, I'm actually not interviewing him. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the last guest at the forum. He began a life in activism as a student anti-apartheid organizer in his native South Africa. I first met him when he was running Greenpeace, and I'm a serious groupie. He actually attended this university as a Rhodes Scholar. How Rhodes must be turning in his grave as Kumi returns here to meet all of you today. Please welcome Kumi Naidoo.
Thank you very much for that generous welcome. I'm reminded of a moment during the liberation struggle in South Africa. If you followed two presentations like what you heard from Christian Amanpour and Chiwetel Ejiofor, you started by saying, most of the really good points I wanted to make have been eloquently made by the previous speaker. And then you said, however, for emphasis, and then you spoke for about 3 hours. Chiwetel's reflection on education just forces me to just share with you my first protest at the age of 15, marching against the inequality in education, where the slogan at the front of the march was, "We want equality." By this time the slogan got to the back of the march, the 12-year-olds were chanting, "We want a color TV." Because kids in white schools had color TVs and kids in black schools had no TVs. And if I'm brutally honest, at that time in my life, I wanted a color TV and equality probably equally. But friends, I am these days more and more nervous when I stand up to speak to any audience because, for example, I was speaking in the US and I was looking at the current moment of history that we're in, where we see a convergence of crises, where we see a financial crisis, a poverty crisis, an inequality crisis, and of course, an existential climate crisis, all converging at the same time. Some of us have called it a perfect storm, some have called it a boiling point. So as I was banging on about analyzing the world, I could just see the audience getting more and more depressed. And when it came to the Q&A time, a woman put up a hand and said, "Dr. Naidu, have you heard of Martin Luther King?" And I said, "Yes, he deeply informed many people in my country in our struggle against apartheid." And then she said, "Do you know what his most famous speech was called?" Thinking it was a trick question, I answered very gently. I said, "I have a dream." And she shouted back, "Yes! It was I have a dream, but when I hear you speak, you have a nightmare. The forests are collapsing, everything is dying." So the challenge of leadership and the challenge of changing narratives is about finding the right balance today between speaking truth to power, not sanitizing the deep, deep crisis that humanity finds itself in, but doing it in a way that also inspires, energizes, activates, rather than create a message that things are so desperately bad, so let's just go home and chill out. But the moment we live in is one where we are seeing high levels of what a philosopher friend of mine calls moral panic. There are three trends that we would be deeply unwise to ignore. We are seeing the rise of authoritarianism in a very fundamental way. It is Bolsonaro, it is Putin, it is Erdogan, it is Modi, and of course it's Trump. By the way, for those of you who are not from the US here, you remember those days when we said, how could the US electoral system give us George W. Bush? My God, we'll have him back anytime right now. The second trend is deepening oligarchic wealth, right? The deepening inequality. And the third is xenophobia. And these three trends are now globally connected. They are infusing each other. And underlying all of this is the uncomfortable reality of climate change. So when we had the global financial crisis in 2008, for example, the World Economic Forum, leaders in business, and so on, what were their approach? It was system recovery, system maintenance, and system protection. But what we need to learn about the current system that is driving humanity to destruction is what we need is system redesign, system innovation, and system transformation. Sorry, please don't clap. I've got a clock that's ticking away there. So rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, is absolutely a betrayal of our children and their children's future. Martin Luther King, speaking in the mid-60s, said, My friends, I note that in the field of modern child psychology, there's a very dominant term called maladjusted. Now, all of us want to live a well-adjusted life and not suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illnesses. But my friends, I say to you, there are certain things in our world that are so moral and unjust that good, decent people should refuse to be well-adjusted to. He went on to say, I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry, to racial discrimination, to the mindless expenditure on military equipment when people have no food to eat. And importantly, he said, on the economy, I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few when millions of God's children are smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in an affluent society. If that was relevant in the United States in the mid-60s, it's 1,000 times more relevant in the United States today as it is for everywhere in the world, that we are seeing an unsustainable level of inequality. In a longer version of the speech, he then says, I now call upon decent men and women around the world to come together to create a new global movement to be known as the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment. That movement was never formed, but that movement is happening all over the world, and I hope that World Forum will be part of the movement of saying the status quo is broken, the status quo must be challenged, and what we need to do is not make baby steps in the positive direction. We need to make fundamental change if we're going to ensure that humanity is delivered a safe future. And to meet this challenge, we also need to recognize some of the mistakes we've made in the past for those of us who have sought justice. One of the mistakes we've made is we have often thought that governments who are inclined to oppress and control, as well as big corporations who are inclined sometimes to exploit and destroy, that they control us primarily through the deployment of what you could call the repressive state apparatus, army, police, formal use of laws and so on. Of course, that does offer quite a lot of control on what you can do and you can't do. However, the more powerful form of control is what you could call the ideological state apparatus. That is the framework for education, the framework for schooling, the framework for religion, and importantly, the framework for the media and how certain social norms and so on are either buttressed or undermined. And so when we look at that, we need to recognize that the people in this room, right, are extremely powerful. But I want to quote with fondness Steve Bannon. When he says, sorry, not a direct quote, I agree with him fully, that politics does not make culture. Culture leads politics. And they've understood that much better than people on the progressive side of history have understood it. And therefore, as culture makers in this room, as entrepreneurs, as people working in the movie and other parts of the media industry, we need to recognize that this is a time for creative maladjustment. Because if simply we respond to the madness of the leadership that we have at the moment and think that we are going to deliver a world of peace and sustainability for the future, then we are making a very, very big mistake. And, you know, in this new context, we're seeing micro-targeting on social media. By the way, I heard under really good advice that Bolsonaro, Trump, Putin, Erdogan, Orban in Hungary, and a few others, they have a WhatsApp group. They're all cheering, and the Crown Prince in Saudi is the moderator of that group. So basically, I think the forces of negativity and the forces of injustice and division and hate are much more savvy about using the media tools that are available to us than we are at the moment. I know that's not a nice thing to say in a place like this, but all I'm saying is we need to be much, much more better, much, much more creative, much, much more bold, and we must be willing to recognize that the stories that reside in what we do, in what we see in our work and so on, are powerful. And here I would like to quote an African brother, Ben Okri, when he said, "Beware the stories you tell, subtly at night. Beneath the waters of consciousness, they are altering your world." And there are wonderful stories like the boy who harnessed the wind. But I was saying to Chuetel area, actually, much as I was very moved by watching this movie a couple weeks ago, I suddenly thought about this other movie that moved me, 12 Years a Slave. And then suddenly I thought, where did I hear 12 years recently? Anybody remembers 12 years has been used recently? When in October, the climate scientists tell us that we have 12 years to get emissions to peak and start coming down. By 2030, we need to reduce our emissions by 50% based on 2010 levels. Otherwise, we are on the route to catastrophic, irreversible climate change. 12 years, of which 1 year is almost gone. We should be shaking in our boots. We should be saying, what kind of civil disobedience do we need to engage in to actually get our leaders to stop? And who are rising up? Who are rising up to meet this challenge? Who? It's our children. A 15-year-old girl in Stockholm, Greta Thunberg, a couple months ago, when the forests are burning, decides, I want to do something. She goes outside the parliament, launches Fridays for Future as an hashtag without no money, no institution, and so on. And today, that is one of the most powerful expressions of the climate movement, where we're seeing our children saying, we are going to keep protesting until our parents behave like adults and recognize. Because you see, what some of these kids told me, when we were growing up, our parents always told us, don't go by fire. Fire is dangerous, right? Now, our whole house is on fire, and our parents are actually taking a sleep and are letting politicians get away with it. And by the way, these young children are amazing in the creativity. I marched here in London with them, and the signs are just like, so one of the signs says, keep Earth clean. It's not Uranus. The other one, as we march past Downing Street, where the cabinet sometimes meets, the kids, well, I said the cabinet sometimes meets because, we don't even know whether it's a fully fledged cabinet there at the moment. But one of the kids, two young girls picked up a sign as we marched past saying, you can get better cabinets at IKEA. So those voices are the voices that we need to elevate in our cultural production at the moment. We have to be thinking about how we do not accept that what is coming from those in power is the best that humanity can be. And as we close the Skoll World Forum this year, we need to communicate in ways that we celebrate our shared common humanity. That we refuse to let those who can only govern and who can only win elections by using xenophobia, racism, and misogyny, as we have seen from the United States to Brazil and to many parts in Europe and elsewhere right now. We need to say that we are not going to respond with hate. We don't have to. And now I'll say the unpopular thing. If we are going to shift the moment of history that we're in, all of us, yeah, and everywhere, who calls ourselves progressive and so on, we have to learn to love the people that voted for Trump. We have to learn to love the people that voted for Brexit. We need to learn for the people who voted for the most backward-thinking people and not write them off with the people that they were manipulated by to vote and act in certain ways. We don't have a choice. The numbers are too many. And if we cannot find the humanity in the people that have drifted in a direction of negativity, that is on our watch. That is on our responsibility. That creativity of winning people back to a view of decency, of equity, of justice, and so on, it's doable. It's our challenge. And if we fail to do it, let's be bold enough to say we have failed rather than pointing fingers to say that the right has won. And so, as I conclude, let me just say, we must recognize that if we are going to win, we need to address one of the difficult problems that we don't talk about. And that is to recognize that the worst disease that humanity faces right now is a disease, not HIV/AIDS, not cancer, not influenza. It's a disease you could call affluenza. It's a pathological illness where people believe that a meaningful, decent life only comes from more and more and more material acquisitions. Unless we ourselves liberate ourselves from that thinking and then think about how in a finite planet, we use the resources that are available in the planet in a more equitable way, in a more shared way. If we don't make those big changes, the good news is the planet is fine. You don't need to worry about saving the planet. The planet is absolutely fine, because if we continue in the way we are, the end result is we will be gone, the planet will still be here. The good news is once we become extinct as a species, the forests will recover, the oceans will replenish, and so on. So understand that the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is about whether we are willing to say we are prepared to put our children and their children's futures ahead of any other interests, that in fact it is about securing their futures and to ensure that we make whatever changes necessary, however big, however bold, however systemic, however structural, we will make those changes because our children deserve much, much better than that. Now, I want to end with a quotation from, well, first let me just note that for organizations like Amnesty and many other civil society organizations in this room, this is a very difficult time. In more than 80 countries around the world, there's attacks on the space of civil society. Every week, on average, according to Global Witness, 4 environmental activists get killed on average somewhere in the world. For Amnesty, in India, our offices have been raided, bank accounts frozen. Turkey, our folks have been in prison. The chair of the board has been in prison for 14 months. He's been released, thankfully. I can walk you around the world just with Amnesty, but all civil society organizations are facing lots of challenges at the moment. Why would I end on this? I want to end on it as a positive note. Because Mahatma Gandhi once said, first, they ignore you. Then they laugh at you. Then they fight you. And then you win. My dear brothers and sisters, the good news is they're not ignoring us, they're not laughing at us, they're fighting us, and they're fighting us really hard. And if Gandhi was right, let's hope we are just one step away from winning justice for everybody on this planet. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, you asked me a question. Okay. I will ask them a question. Tell them I have one question for them quickly. So, while you're standing, I have one question for you. And that is, how many of you know where your ancestors come from? And go as far back as you can. As far, far back as you can. Okay. Quick. Illinois? Italy. Oh, sorry, Italy. Okay, now, Italy, sorry. I want you to go way back. Anybody else? There's some white people here saying Africa. Okay. So why do you say that? Because it's true. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, it's beyond reasonable doubt that humanity started on the African continent, from the Rift Valley in Kenya all the way to Ethiopia. Folks, ended up moving to Australia and working their way back to Europe. And I'm sorry, along the way, some of you lost your color. Sorry about that. So just to say, in Africa, anything that we're fighting for, whether it's education, health, against HIV/AIDS, however depressing it is, we never end a great gathering like this without a song. So I'm going to take a risk and teach you a song to end, which has just 2 words, Pambili Africa, which is forward with Africa, and given that all of you are Africans, because that's where your roots are, we can end on that, if that's okay. Well, this wasn't scripted, by the way, it's just moved. They're panicking. Okay, so just 2 words. Pambili, 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 Pambili Africa. Pambili, 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 Pambili Africa. Okay, everybody now. Pambili, 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 Pambili Africa. Pambili, 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 Pambili Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nice job.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, before we close the forum, let's take a couple of moments just to remember some of those amazing connections made, hands shaken, conversations had and overheard. We're going to play our amazing end of forum video.
Accelerating possibility happens when optimism meets urgency, when imagination encounters grit, and when ambition converges with humility.
In the Skull World Forum's humble beginnings, we invited about 250 social entrepreneurs to a 3-day program here in Oxford. Our hope was that we could support a community where social entrepreneurs would help each other. We are delighted to welcome you, the world's finest and most dedicated people, to a week of discoveries made and friendships formed. This week in Oxford, in this gorgeous theater and beyond, we will celebrate your new stories of triumph.
Einstein famously said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge. For knowledge is limited, but imagination encompasses the entire world." You are an extraordinary gathering of people working for equality and justice, and our country needs you more than ever. We need your ideas, your experiences, we need your internationalism, and thank you for sharing them with us.
If we look to the margins, we can find clues, indicators of what's to come, and we can also find incredible solutions.
We all have a role to play in shifting our thinking to a way that's not a white dominant way of thinking, but a way that is inclusive of all perspectives. And that's only gonna happen when we sit down together and begin a conversation around things that are often uncomfortable.
We've realized that out-of-school girls tend to be concentrated in certain geographies. And now with our smartphone and our data and tech approach, we've actually come to this point that 5% of villages in India have 40% of the out-of-school girls.
Together, we can find the necessary tools to transform our greatest challenges into our greatest triumphs. We can be remembered as the generation that looked the future square into the eyes and acted upon what it saw.
In Ghana, people usually say education is expensive, forgetting that ignorance is expensive too. It costs way more money than education.
The fake news rubric, the fake news framework, is actually being utilized by authoritarian leaders around the world to justify their own repression.
We live in a world where men control the tools of power, be it economic, social, political, cultural. And although women participate in different phases of life, men control the keys to the real power.
If we're not reaching the youngest refugees with education, how do they have a chance to go forward, to rebuild their societies, to reach their potential?
I know education can help me and help my society and also help my country, because they cannot go back to Syria one day without education.
There are 3 billion people that will be living in unsafe housing, substandard housing by 2030. That's a third of the entire global population.
It's smarter to be closer to your investees than your investors. That's how you create greater impact.
I believe we need to move this century from being growth addicted to becoming growth agnostic, so that we stop having institutions that are financially, politically, and socially addicted to endless growth, and that we can actually instead have economies that learn to thrive.
How can we be human? How can we exist? How can we take space if we're unable to even be acknowledged as people? That's what happens when we're not expressing our experiences.
The elephant in the room is the current business model. The data, the way that it's captured, the way that it's harvested without people's consent. It feels to me a little bit like we're talking about the cherry on the cake, a huge amount, which is the algorithm, and how does it look, how does it taste? And then we start talking a little bit about the ingredients that go into the cake, that's the data. And we're missing the fact that the cook is just a psychopath, and no one's talking about it, and nobody wants to eat that cake.
These social entrepreneurs, like all the others in the Skoll awardee community, start with a keen understanding of the present, its deficiencies, and its opportunities.
So now it's time for us, and by that I mean all of us, to do our work. And all of you in this room that are committed to solving the world's most pressing challenges. Our work is to keep falling in love with the problem and not staying in love with our solutions.
Strangers helping other strangers in their darkest moments, all by text, works. I hope that everybody who's ever texted us knows that you are stronger than you know, and if you ever doubt that, if you ever doubt how strong you are, we got you.
I hope that one day I can stand before you and truly deserve your applause when M-Pharma ensures that every African is not denied access to high-quality medicine because of their socioeconomic background.
A bit of being naive can open up some incredible possibilities for innovation. It forced us to partner deeply with those on the front lines who did know.
Just as there are social entrepreneurs, there are anti-social entrepreneurs. Just as we are committed and we are driven, and some of us are smart, they are also committed and driven and smart, but they lack one thing. And that thing they lack is that they don't have the trust and the solidarity that binds this room.
These leaders envision a future where equality and justice and access to the basic human needs prevail. They are not mere possibilities, they are reality.
If you feel uncomfortable, lean into that and just sit in that and know, wow, like I'm actually growing and stretching as a person because I feel uncomfortable. We are all related, our suffering is mutual, and our thriving is mutual.
Yeah, applaud yourselves. That was you. I can hardly believe it was only Tuesday that we were all gathered here and I was talking about Einstein and rabbit holes and Brexit. What a lot can happen in 3 days. And whilst we were busy here, scientists working on 8 sites across 4 continents captured an image on film of a black hole for the first time. Black holes were, of course, first theorized by Einstein in the theory of relativity in 1905, and are best understood as a giant cosmic rabbit hole. And a few hours later, Brexit was postponed. Curiouser and curiouser. May wonders of heaven and earth continue to abound. And now, as we all make our own individual ways back to our individual galaxies, I wish that you travel well, you travel at warp speed, and you travel safely. See you again next year.
Thank you.